Well, good morning, good afternoon, good evening, everybody, wherever you are. Welcome to the UN Food Systems Dialogue on Plant Based Food Systems, which is the first ever dialogue on plant based food systems. And in this hour, we're going to be talking about the climate impacts of a plant based food system. And we are joined by uh, J. Morris Hicks, who is the author of Outcry, the big picture book that explains it all, and Glen Merzer, the author of Food is Climate, which I can see has been climbing up the ranks in Amazon. I think you have 42 five-star ratings.
Excellent. Silas, you're closing on us, man.
Or something like that now. Yeah. Let's talk about the class of a planet system. But before you had this very important that came out this week. So can you talk about that?
You, did you ask me?
Yes.
I couldn't hear what the question was.
The question was you wrote a very important memo this week on how young people are reacting to the
Yeah,
climate crisis.
actually, that memo is going to go out in about 1 hour from now.
Oh, I see.
I was just reading, Glenn, some of the highlights, and it was based on a BBC article describing a study among kids that were 16 to 25 years old and asking them how they were feeling about the world state of affairs. And here's a few of the bullet points from that study. Nearly 60% of those young people said they were worried or extremely worried. Three quarters, 75%, said they thought the future was frightening. 56% said they thought humanity was doomed. Two-thirds reported feeling sad, afraid, anxious. Many felt fear, anger, despair, grief, and shame, as well as hope. One 16-year-old said it's different for young people. For us, the destruction of the planet is personal. And so when I saw that article, I said, I got to write about this because here these kids know more than we think they do. And yet they also know, some of them know, that none of the people in authority are talking about the number one cause of climate change. And that's
Right.
just unforgivable. So
Right.
that's what it's all about today.
So Glenn wrote one of the most important books of the era on this issue, food movement. And how would you tell young people that there is no need to despair like that?
Well, the solution is in our own hands, which is diet. Uh, the, the number one cause of climate change is animal agriculture. That's the point we all have to drive home and make clear, and certainly beginning in Glasgow at the climate summit, we need to make that case. We need to get the media and the politicians and the climatologists talking about the real cause of the climate crisis, which is animal agriculture. But to the extent that they won't, to the extent that they keep giving us resistance, we need to get the word out any way we can, just like this dialogue right now. So if people realize, and young people realize, that the number one driver of climate change is animal agriculture, all they have to do is not support animal agriculture. And it's a very simple route to doing that. You just don't eat animals. You don't eat meat, you don't eat fish, you don't eat chicken, you don't eat dairy. And what you will find is that you get healthier and you feel better and life gets better. It lifts your spirits to be plant-based, and you become part of a plant-based global community. And there's nothing easier. It's the easiest thing I ever did in my life was go vegan. So it's easy. You know, people in certain circumstances have to deal with their family or their spouses that are, loved ones, and you just have to tell them you're doing it for yourself and for the planet, for the future. And so as soon as you do it, as soon as you go vegan, you find hope. But without a dietary transition to veganism, I'm afraid there is no hope.
Yeah, you use the analogy of uh, going to a doctor with a wound.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Well, if you go to a doctor with a wound, the doctor will clean the wound and dress it, and they always say the same thing: leave it alone, and it will heal. There's no doctor anywhere who ever says, "I want you every day to remove the bandage and scrape this thing." Right? You don't scrape a wound every day. You leave it alone, and it heals. Well, we're humans. We're part of life, and we're connected to the earth. And the earth has the same system. If left alone, it heals. And it heals with a bias towards life. You know, we currently are rightly worried about roughly 410 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. But scientists are amazing. They're able to determine what the atmosphere was like in the past. And they know that 50 million years ago, there were 3,500 parts per million of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. It was roughly 9 times worse, as it were, than it is now.
Mm-hmm.
And the earth cooled and it healed. And how did it do that? And I could give a multiple choice question to our viewers right now. How did the earth cool so much? It was 10 degrees Celsius hotter 50 million years ago than it is now. So how did we do it? Multiple choice question. Did we do it with smart thermostats, LED light bulbs, carpooling, or vegetation? And the answer is vegetation. That's how we did it. So that's all we need now. We can heal the earth with vegetation. And in fact, the vegetation will even plant itself. We don't even have to go to any great efforts. We just have to get out of the way. And getting out of the way means protecting the oceans, stopping industrial fishing, and it means restoring the grazing land, which is close to 40% of the Earth's non-ice surface, restoring the grazing land to forest and other vegetation.
Yeah. What is the equivalent of dressing the wound in this case?
Well, dressing the wound, the equivalent might be some efforts we have to make at afforestation, some places where we do have to do planting, some water capture, which is a method to restore deserts to more productive environments for vegetation. So there's a lot we can do with water capture. There's biochar, which is a soil amendment that enriches the soil. So there are things like that we can do, and everything we can possibly do to prevent wildfires. You know, if that means moving electrical wires underground, anything we can do, because what's happening in California and in the West is a nightmare for the climate. So we have to, it's impossible to prevent wildfires completely, and in normal times, wildfires wouldn't necessarily be always a negative. It's part of the natural cycle, but not the kinds of wildfires we're having now. So we have to do everything we can to combat wildfires.
Right. So Jim, there is a good news story here, right? So that there is a way out, that we can thrive as a species and leave a beautiful planet for our children and grandchildren. And so in Outcry, you talk about actually creating a new civilization that,
Right.
yeah, that lives within the bounds of the planet and simultaneously thrives along with nature. So you think as an engineer, is it possible to get there?
Well, I think it's possible to get there if we start with shifting to plant-based eating. We've
Right.
got to buy ourselves some time.
Right.
What I described in Outcry was a process that would take 50 years a little bit to redesign and repopulate an entirely new way of living for all of civilization. One that maybe is 5 to 10 times more efficient than what we have now. Just starting from the very beginning, and if in doubt, take it out, but make it luxurious, make it attractive, make it fun, make it great health care, great employment, all of the wonderful things that everybody loves. But basically, building into that entire system of living a process that we cannot even make a mistake anymore. There's only plant-based foods available in that entire civilization, and all of the cleaning and the sewage and the housing and the transportation systems. You know, there are no owned houses in that what I'm envisioning, because we don't really own anything. We don't own the land. We don't own the houses on the land. But we've got a lot of houses around the world that are empty all the time because wealthy people have lots of homes and big homes that they don't need. And so my idea was to start from scratch and redesign a civilization that was as green as we could possibly make it, and still have it be sellable, marketable to the masses to want to do it. The idea was that there would be a contract that people would sign to join that community, and they would have to agree on all of the rules. There would be full employment, health care, housing for everybody. But a lot of the people would not want to move there because it's only plant-based eating, and there's also not some of the luxuries that they're used to having. But we're just about a dozen hurricanes away from having a big line to get in that place.
Right.
Because when you got a dry place to live and you got food, just ask those Haitians who were storming our southern border last week. They're not looking for luxury; they're looking for food and a place to sleep.
Right. So I know, Glenn, you said that Joanna said, let's move there right away. If there is right?
Right.
Yeah.
Tolosa.
Jim, where is this that we're moving to?
Well, my second idea of the location was going from Boston to Seattle. I started it out thinking it would be Atlanta to Los Angeles. And within 6 months, I said, that doesn't make any sense. It's too far south, and it's going to be hot, hot, hot. So we got to put it as far north as we can go, which would be Boston to Seattle, and have it be 25 miles wide, 3,000 miles long, Hyperloop system down the middle, 760 miles an hour. You're 3 hours away from all of your relatives on a Hyperloop system. And you're right next to Canada. You can't get any further north in the United States. But it could be built in 25-mile segments or 10-mile segments or whatever. But we have to have a master plan before we can start building any of it. We've got to know where it's going and how it's going to connect, and be able to add on to it, improve on it as we go through the iterations.
All right. So now I know the latitude where I'll be living, and I hope by next year to know the longitude.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah, I heard Dr. James Lovelock. He was in an interview 10 years ago, and it was on Canadian television. And he was telling them then, 10 years ago, that we're not going to be able to reverse climate change. It's going to be really bad, and there's going to be billions of refugees. And he said, northern countries like Canada and like Russia and other places are going to have people lining up to get there. And he says, you're going to have to lock the gates, and they'll have to tell people coming up here, we can't admit any more people because we cannot feed you. And just what we're seeing this week in down on the Mexican border with the Haitians. It's just a sad story, a really sad story, and it's just a trickle right now. Imagine a million people at the border, or
Right.
10 million people at the border, and what do? I mean, it's we've got to plan ahead and have a system of living that everyone can enjoy and somehow um, have a sustainable civilization. I know that the Global Footprint Network came out with a number, said if everybody lived like the average European, how many people could the Earth support indefinitely? And their answer was 2 billion. But it got worse. They said, how many could live if everybody lived the same as the average American? 1 billion people. I mean, that's how wasteful we are. So I said, if we redesign our civilization, and my idea, I call it the Great Big Northern, because it goes across the north, and it's named after the Great Northern Railway that ran that same route, by the way. So it's all about planning ahead and having a vision that people can see.
Jim, do you have an answer to how many people the Earth can sustain if we're all vegan?
Actually, I took a guess, a scientific, we call it a swag in engineering school, scientific wild ass guess, and I said 4 billion, which would be half of what we have now, but twice as many as the Footprint Network said. With according to Europeans, it'd be twice as efficient as Europe, and it'd be 4 times as efficient as the United States. So 4 billion. Yeah. Lovelock thinks the ideal number is 5.5 billion to 1 billion. And he said, then we could live any way we wanted to. And Mother Nature wouldn't be bothered.
I think, fundamentally, I think that if we live the way Europeans live, or if they live the way Americans live, sustainably, we cannot support too many people.
Right.
Not even a billion. Why? Because the way Americans live or the way Europeans live, everything is open loop. So we take nutrients from this side, we flush it down the toilet, and it goes into the ocean. I mean, how many times can you keep doing that? Because when you look at sustainable living, sustainability is about an infinite loop. It's playing an infinite game, meaning I can live like this forever on this planet. So that's what we're claiming, I mean, sustainability. Right. And so to me, the right question is, how would you live knowing that there are 7 billion or 8 billion people on the planet and there are 10 million other species on the planet? How would you live? And that's a different question.
Yeah.
And so that's the kind of question that Aviram has been asking, and people at Sadhana Forest have been asking. So they're trying to close the loop. They're saying you can't, it has to be where the nutrients are kept in place. You can't keep flushing it down the toilet and expect it to somehow regenerate,
right.
in that space, because there's only a finite amount of open loop engineering that you can do before it says you better close the loop, otherwise I'm going to throw you away.
Now you read about the Telosa, the city of the future, Telosa.
Right. Yeah.
And that was a closed loop system, I think. They thought that through. It's similar to Bill Gates has done some work in that area. But that's what I'm thinking about with the Great Big Northern. It has to be closed loop. We have to take care of our garbage. We have to reuse it. We have to quit generating so much garbage. And if we've got plant-based foods, that takes care of a huge part of it right there.
Right. Yeah. We were estimating that, as soon as you go to a plant-based food system, suddenly the violation of the donut, the outer boundaries of the donut, kind of go away, because you kind of come into the donut, and then it's a matter of maintaining it within the donut, right? So it becomes an engineering exercise that you and I are trained to do, Jim. This is what we do as systems engineers. This is what we design, and Glenn is one of the best exponents of storytelling, right? How do you tell the story that people understand what we've been saying? I've been writing papers, right? And it's not It's very hard for people to understand papers. That uh,
And I've
sure,
been
you can close the loop.
weekly blogs.
What I found as a non-scientist
Right.
is that certain subjects um, required required less technical knowledge than I might have initially thought. And I learned that when I first wrote books on nutrition. I'm not a doctor, and I'm not a dietitian. I have no degrees in nutrition. I'm self-taught in nutrition. But as someone who's self-taught in nutrition, I soon realized that I know far, far more about nutrition than 99.9% of medical doctors. You know, we just assume that since doctors go to med school, that they must know something about nutrition. So when we go to the doctor, we might ask him or her what we should eat for a certain condition we have. They have no idea. They've never studied it. We're just assuming, because it's logical to assume, that since they work in the field of health, they might know something about eating, but they know nothing about it. They
Right.
have no training in it. You might as well ask your plumber what to eat. Your plumber probably has read some diet books at least. So I realized that by being self-taught in nutrition, yes, I had things I could say in nutrition, and I could study the literature, and as something akin to being a science reporter, I could report the truth. And in nutrition, what you find is that there isn't really a legitimate debate between the plant-based diet and an animal-based diet. We're told that this is a controversial subject, and sometimes we see in the media something about something advocating eating meat or dairy. But it's always bogus. Those studies are always bogus. And all the real studies, all the actual science, points to the health benefits of fruits and vegetables and fiber and everything on mushrooms, everything on a plant-based diet. And there's not a single study anywhere in the world. You can't find one study for the benefits of fried chicken. There are no studies for roast beef. There are no studies for, 3-cheese lasagna or something. There's no science for any animal food. There's nothing. There's zero. There's zilch. So I found that without being a scientist or a dietitian or a doctor, I could write about this stuff.
Right.
Then climate seemed to me really daunting. I'm not a physicist. I'm not, I never studied climate before, and this seemed like this would really be tough. As you know, Silas, I leaned on you a little bit to guide my research. But what I found is it's so obvious that if you used to have a planet with 6 trillion trees, and now you have a planet with 3 trillion trees, and trees sequester carbon dioxide, that there's no way to draw down, the name of Paul Hawkins' book on climate, Draw Down, there's no way to draw down carbon dioxide with photovoltaic cells, as good as they are. There's no way to draw it down with wind turbines, as good as they are. The problem we have, clearly, you don't have to be a physicist to know this, the problem we have is a cumulative problem. It's more and more greenhouse gases accumulating in the atmosphere. So the solution can't be, let's slow down the rate of accumulation by driving cars that get 50 miles to the gallon instead of 30 miles to the gallon. You're not improving the situation at all. You're just making it worse at a slightly slower rate. The only solution has to be trees and healthy oceans. The carbon sinks. And how do you get trees and healthy oceans? You stop plundering the seas with industrial fishing, and you stop destroying the land with grazing. Done.
On that note, I want to thank both of you for opening my eyes. Up until a few months ago, I'd never really realized that the Sahara was once green. Why don't you talk about that a little bit? I told that to my wife last week, and she said, "Are you kidding?" And she jumped online and pulled up did a Google search, she found the same paper that I was quoting from, a Smithsonian paper
Right.
that talked about it.
Forgive me for holding up my book, but there's a NASA image right here. All the red we see is pasture maintenance fires.
Uh-huh.
The brown is 6,000 miles of mostly desert, from the Western Sahara, across the Sahara, to the deserts of the Middle East, to the Thar Desert in northern India, to the Gobi Desert in China. So did the Earth just make a mistake when, over hundreds of millions of years, when life was flourishing and forests were forming, it just forgot about that area? No. 10,000 years ago, that was green.
Yeah.
So now we're talking forests have existed for hundreds of millions of years. Isn't it a coincidence that it stopped being forested 10,000 years ago? What happened 10,000 years ago? We're talking a very, a very small fraction in terms of history of time. And so what happened 10,000 years ago? Humans invented agriculture.
Mm-hmm.
We were able to chop down trees. We were able to engage in animal husbandry. And this brown was done by goats as much as anything else. This is the result of bringing goats and sheep and cattle onto the land. It wasn't the only factor. I'm not saying there were no other factors in the creation of the Sahara, but it was probably the leading factor, in my opinion. It's interesting that the people who managed somehow to live in the Sahara today and live in the Thar Desert in northern India today, the leading occupation is animal husbandry. They're continuing to lead the lifestyle that created the environment that they live in. This has been going on for thousands of years. Now, it took them thousands of years to turn the forested Sahara into the Sahara Desert. But with our intensive animal agriculture today, and with 80 billion farmed animals on the planet, we can do this kind of damage much more quickly.
Yeah.
And all these fires, these pasture maintenance fires, these are not these are not what the FAO calls a natural part of the carbon cycle. This is a climate disaster, burning vegetation every year. They burn everything that the cows don't eat. So, and do they quantify this when they look at the causes of climate change? They do not. Do they quantify? And the answer is no, because it's impossible to do. Do they quantify when they have weighted nets at the bottom of the ocean, disturbing the sediment at the bottom of the ocean, trawling the bottom of the ocean for miles and miles and miles? They disturb the sediment, the carbon comes up from the bottom of the ocean, reducing the ocean's capacity to store carbon, acidifying the ocean. Do they quantify that when they look at the effects of animal agriculture? Of course, there's no way to begin to quantify that. They won't know how. So this is what's happening to the earth. It's being destroyed by the foolishness of eating animals.
On that note, and back to the kids for a second, I have a list of, in addition to the governmental leaders of the 195 countries that we have on this planet, and thousands of religions, I have 6 groups here that are failing those kids. It's the UN is one, and the IPCC aren't really telling us about the number one cause of climate change. It is thousands of universities and millions of scientists who are failing us. Some scientists aren't, but they're in the minority. Also, the environmental NGOs, like the Sierra Club, Nature Conservancy, they're failing us. They're not telling us about the number one cause of climate change. It is religious leaders in most faiths who are failing us. And finally, the global news media has failed to doggedly search and broadcast loudly the truth about the most important topic in the history of humanity. So how are they failing us exactly? For starters, none of them are telling us loudly and clearly about the single largest driver of climate change? Not a single one. Now that's what we got to change. I mean, the three of us talking about it on Facebook is a step in the right direction, but none of those organizations are telling us. None of them.
Right.
How do we get that started?
Yeah, it is fascinating to watch. It's fascinating to watch a species that calls itself Homo sapiens sapiens.
Yeah, right.
The wise hominid behaving like, clearly behaving like Homo doofus doofus. It's like,
Yeah.
I mean, other species must be looking at us saying, what the heck is wrong with this? It doesn't even know what the real problem is.
Yeah.
Yeah, but it is, I am getting a lot of this to the climate problem formulation into people. We understand where the experiment came from and what it is the leading cause and why you should be shutting down the killing machine as soon as possible. So maybe I'll just show that and explain the bathtub problem. And let me start sharing.
I take this dilemma kind of personally because after writing 4 books and over 300 weekly blogs, before that I did at one time 737 consecutive daily blogs before I started my weekly blogs. And to this day, guys, I don't know 20 people even talk about it with me. People that know me, maybe have read my book, probably most of them haven't, but there's hardly anybody talking about it. And I'm counting family,
Jim, don't.
colleagues, classmates from college. Nobody even talks about it.
Jim, have getting through. They are listening. It's just that they are all stuck going along with the herd at the moment. But they will peel off one by one. Now, I was so struck by the fact that now we
You're locked up, Silas.
Yeah, I was saying that V8 is now advertised as the original plant drink, meaning that it's not that you see in front of the plant move. And so that's very encouraging that's where our businesses are going. So the climate problem basically is hold on a second, a way to help us solve the climate emergency by solving an analogy, a realistic analogy. Because when you talk about, all these gases and talk about how the gases react with each other and things like that, people get confused. It's just too complicated. So you don't want to address that. But there is a way we can distill it. As scientists, we should be able to distill it so that people understand why they're doing what they're doing. Because when it comes from them, then it's easier for them to say, yeah, this is why I'm doing it. So the analogy assumes that we are in a bathtub, that there is a baby in a bathtub. So imagine that a baby representing all life on Earth is stuck in a bathtub that's filling up with water at 50 liters per minute. So 50 liters per minute corresponds to the 50 billion tons of greenhouse gases we're adding to the atmosphere every year. So it's like, 1 liter is like a billion tons of greenhouse gases and a year, right? That's an analogy. When you arrive, the bath is filled up with 1,000 liters of water. That corresponds to the 1,000 of CO2 to the atmosphere in 1750. So assume that you are a plumber and you have to now save the baby from drowning. You see there are two faucets that are pouring the 50 liters per minute. there's a burning machine faucet that's pouring 35 liters per minute, and the killing machine faucet is pouring 15 liters per minute. And so together it makes up 50 liters per minute. You also see that this faucet, the burning machine faucet, is connected to this aerosol tank. It's like a cistern that's above the bathtub. And it has 350 liters of water. So 10 times as much as this flow. And for every 1 liter per minute that you reduce the flow in the burning machine faucet, 10 liters will flow from the aerosol cistern into the bathtub. So this aerosol system corresponds to the cooling gases that we have added to the atmosphere, which are roughly masking about 1/3 of the heating. Okay, so that's why it's about 1/3 of the total. Now the killing machine faucet is also connected to another drain. It's connected to the drain. So when you turn off the killing machine faucet, so for every 1 liter per minute you turn it off, you'll open the drain by 2 liters per minute from the bathtub. So if you shut this off completely, you will reduce the flow by 15 liters per minute, and then you will drain by 30 liters per minute. So overall, the bathtub will start filling up at 5 liters per minute instead of 50 liters per minute. And that's where the 90%, that's a 90% reduction. That's where the 87% comes from in the position paper that I wrote. So the important thing is that this drain is going to drain the CO2 from the bathtub, the water from the bathtub, and it's going to fill up this tank, which is the vegan reforestation tank. And that's 2,000 liters that's open in the tank. It's waiting, saying, hey, fill me up.
Yeah.
I can solve the problem, right? So as a plumber, I say, if you come in here as a plumber and you say, what is the first thing you should be doing? If you don't turn off the killing machine faucet, you don't belong in the competent plumbers of climate change.
That's right.
You'll have to go to the IPCC, the other side of it. Okay. So first of all, the questions are, can you save the baby and drain the bathtub without overflowing the vegan reforestation tank? So what does it mean to save the baby? So the premise is that the baby is already struggling to breathe and will most certainly drown if the climate bathtub holds more than 1,200 liters of water. So you can't raise it by more than 200 liters. Okay, definitely. But the less you raise it, the better off we are. Okay? So that's the premise of the problem. So they ask, can you save the baby and drain the bathtub without overflowing the tank? And if the answer to one is yes, determine how long you can procrastinate before it becomes impossible to save the baby. Because every minute you procrastinate, the bathtub is going to fill up by another 50 liters. Another 50 liters, So in 4 years, in 4 minutes, it'll be 1,200 liters and the baby will drown. So definitely you cannot procrastinate beyond 4 minutes. But you cannot even procrastinate beyond, less than that, because you have to start draining the bathtub. Okay. So that's the second part. And then the second part of this question is the minimum you need to raise the water level in the bathtub in order to save the baby and drain the bathtub. Because you have to raise it by at least 50 liters that you're draining from the bathtub. You're more than what's, because you have to shut it down by at least 4 liters per minute here. And 50 liters from this tank into the bathtub. At least 5 liters, and you'll 30 liters into the bathtub, 30 liters out. So then the bathtub stay at 10-50. It'll keep pouring 30 liters per minute into the vegan reforestation tank, and it'll over the tank. Is it more than that? A little bit more. So in order to start reducing the flow in the level in the bathtub. So that's why it's not an easy question, but it's also not too hard a question. I think that any student who gets into the engineering college that I will should be able to answer this question. Okay? Any student, any high school student who gets into my engineering college should be able to answer this question. So then the third question is a little more complicated. It's much more practical, actually, because it says, answer 1 and 2, assuming that the killing machine faucet is rusty and it takes you 5 minutes to linearly reduce its flow to zero. If it takes you 5 minutes to reduce its flow to zero, then how long can you procrastinate before you start reducing it? Okay. And then what's the minimum you need to raise the water level in the bathtub? So you need to answer these two questions. And when we answer the third question, you will immediately see that you have no time to waste. So you need to start working on this right away. And so that's why I say, please send us your solutions by November 30th, and we'll publish the correct answers on December 1st. And we're also offering a $1,000 reward to both the first and the 2026 school that sends in a correct entry. And every institution that enters, doesn't matter if your answers are correct or not, we will send you the correct answers on December 1st, and we will send you an autographed copy of Glen's book.
All right.
Okay.
Excellent.
And so that's the challenge, the climate bathtub challenge. And that the idea behind that challenge is to get everyone to try it out. Everyone to say, okay, we are going to be the climate superheroes of the planet. And we are going to figure out how to solve this ourselves. Let's not wait for governments to tell us that you need to turn off the killing machine. I mean, it's obvious. There is nothing that does not improve when you turn off the killing machine. Okay, it's.
Silas, I have a question. Have you gotten any feedback or any buy-in from any schools of engineering, any academics that you know? I was thinking of Dr. Corey Bradshaw. Do you know that name? He's at Flinders University in Australia, and he was the lead author in a paper talking about our ghastly future. You just Google ghastly future, his paper comes up. Right. But he seems to have a better big picture grasp on the state of the problem that we are in than almost anyone I've heard, and he can explain it in 2 minutes. So right. I think he would love something like this, and he would be helpful in promoting it around the world, I think.
I would love to talk this. I have been approached by student groups from India who want to spread the word. In fact, I'm speaking to about 50 of them very soon. They are figuring out the time schedule. So I spoke to their organizers. I showed them I explained to them the bathtub problem, and they got really excited. And so they're going to connect with all the schools in India as much as possible. And I have an intern here who is going to reach out to all the AP classes, the advanced placement classes, environmental science AP classes. So there is movement. I mean, people are beginning to see, especially if you talk to vegan kids.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, they know it, they get it right away, and then they understand why it is so important that you need to shut off the killing machine as soon as possible, right? And because Jim Hansen has been writing about the aerosol tank,
right,
for a long. He just wrote another paper on it actually, and so they know this. I mean, the climate scientists know this.
Hansen did not mention anything about cutting out animal-based food, did he?
No, he does not. I think there is like a gag order on scientists. There's like a gag order from the industry or something like that going on. I cannot explain it any other way, right?
I mean, a gag order on a sinking ship, not to plug the ship, gag order, that'd be unpopular. Oh my God.
Have you been getting submissions with answers?
I got one from Jim.
But then you changed some of the baseline rules too. Right. After I put mine in, because you realized there was a little bit maybe not totally clear at first. Right. I spent 3 or 4 hours. My head was kind of going crazy. But I got my calculus, so I was having to do it kind of trial and error.
Right. Yeah.
But I thought it was brilliant.
Yeah. Thank you. I mean, it helps actually to create like a spreadsheet out of it,
Yeah,
and then write down, what will happen if you did this,
right.
and then let the spreadsheet figure out for you.
Kind of do a
And then, yeah,
simulation, we call that in earth
yeah,
engineering.
yeah, then it can do the integration for you, and you can see, where it leads you.
Right,
And you quickly realize that there is a differential equation involved.
right.
Right. Yeah. But this is the kind of problem that I used to solve routinely before I got into IIT. I mean, it is training to get into my engineering college, that entrance exam. I think this question could be on the entrance exam. I bet you.
Yeah,
It's so meaning, it's that level of complexity. It's not beyond high school mathematics. Okay. So we really don't have an excuse as a species not to address this honestly. Okay. But I think we need engineers like us to get on the case, because
absolutely.
we are trained to look at the big picture and solve problems,
Right,
whereas most people are trained to just, you know, uh, examine it in a way that will make the most money for their organizations, whatever that is, for their purposes. Um,
and
Very few people have the luxury that we have, Jim, which
yeah,
is
there's no scientific course called big picture science.
exactly.
So every scientist is just one of a million scientists that study one little narrow corner of the overall problem, and that's why so very few of them understand the big picture. Like
Right.
James Lovelock, for example, I think he's the greatest big picture scientist that ever lived, but I've never heard him even say anything about cutting out animal-based foods.
Right. Right. I mean, I have wondered about that. I wondered whether it is because it is tied to colonialism. Because to me, carnism and colonialism are just two sides of the same coin.
Right.
So maybe they're trying to preserve the colonial system that has given them all this wealth, right? All these riches.
I had this. If you can share my screen, I have a slide that deals with this question we're talking about here.
Okay, so you want your
If I can share my screen, do I hit plus share down here?
yeah, you can share your yeah, or I can share it for you.
All
Would
right.
you like me to do that?
All right. Let's see if this works. Okay, am I sharing now? I don't see it. Oh well. That's not.
Let me
Wait
let me.
anymore.
Oh, there you go. I'll allow you to stream
Oh wait. Is it?
screen.
Okay. Can you see that?
Yep,
See my screen?
we can see that.
As for ecological health, on a per calorie basis, animal-based foods require over 10 times as much land, water, and energy as do plant-based foods. 10 times. So if we cannot take the animal out of the equation when it comes to feeding ourselves, we will never learn to live in harmony with nature, thereby placing the future of our civilization and our species in serious jeopardy. So why don't more people get it? And I coined this term, the protein myth, aka locked brain syndrome, because of the mistaken yet almost ubiquitous belief that humans actually need to eat animal protein to be healthy. A host of incredibly powerful plant-based solutions to the world's most serious health, hunger, and sustainability crises never even make it to the table for consideration. And I think that's why we never heard James Lovelock mention it. I think that's a widespread disease, locked brain syndrome.
That's as good an explanation as I've heard from
Yeah.
anyone, Jim. Thank you.
Yeah. So anyway, that's the only one I wanted to share.
Thank you so much. And
locked brain syndrome. I really believe that. So it can't be any other explanation. They actually think we need to eat it. So, the first question they ask you is, where do you get your protein?
Right.
It's just it's so sad.
Right. Yeah. Well, on that note, we have to end this. So thank you so much for your wisdom, both of you. Thank you for being here. And
Thank you, Silas.
yeah, any
Enjoy.
last words you want to say to our viewers before we close this?
I would just like to reiterate, if you're not already vegan, it's the easiest thing to do. You just eat plants and you don't eat animal foods, and you get healthier. And we live in the fattest, sickest country in the history of the planet, and it's not because of mushrooms and broccoli.
Right.
So, just learn that the easiest thing you can do is eat plants and get healthy. And Silas has frozen, which is his way of living forever.
Yeah. Well, I've got the next one coming up. I'm going to go ahead and shift over to the other waiting room since